This is Not So Grand Designs episode 2. This episode is all about the professional services associated with trying to build an eco house on a plot that we've just secured. So we reached agreement on the plot at the beginning of April. It's now the 6th of May and we're into the process. So what I wanted to do is to run through all the different professional services that you might have and talk about the ones that we have actually contracted or will contract for. So the most important one at the beginning certainly is your architect. So your architect designs the house, inputs the documents to the planning process, liaises with other professionals, does the utility searches, and ultimately at the end does your building regulations submission. We met with 5 architects and eventually picked the one that we felt understood the building technique that we wanted to use, which was SIPS, but also had relationships with professionals in the local area, specifically the planning authority, and had previous experience applying for planning for these types of properties in this type of area. We decided to take on a planning consultant. Not everybody does this, but the planning that we originally had was an outline planning permission, and we were then going to be applying for reserve matters. This includes the discharge of certain conditions that was set in the outline planning permission, and because we were working in a slightly sensitive planning area, we decided to use a local planning consultant who had experience with working with the planning authority that we were going to be applying to. So planning consultant discharges the conditions from the outline, prepares the documents and submits the reserve matters application, and then handles all the representation to the planning committee. At the same time, and for the planning process, we have to provide a geotechnical report, which is basically a ground study. Initially, you do phase 1 as a desk study, you pay for that. And that does all the searches for things like mining and underground structures and reports of subsidence in the area and all that sort of thing. So that was done where we bought actually a license from the company to use one that had been prepared for the original owner of the property. Yesterday, the 5th, we did the trial dig, which is the phase 2 part of the process, where they test their assumptions in terms of the land and any contamination, and also take samples for testing. The most important part from our point of view was to understand what the physical structure of the property was, and it transpires that most of the property is covered with what's called made ground, which is basically, in our case, dump from the old quarry. So it's a mixture of soil and stone and other bits and pieces. Unfortunately, with made ground, you can't use that as the basis for foundations. So we had to dig down through that to find the bedrock, which we found at 2.6 metres, which is about 8 feet. That's pretty deep. Now, to scrape away the soil over the whole of the property, in order to do that, you would end up with an enormous soil removal issue. And so our suspicion is that we'll probably go with some sort of piling system to go down through the made ground and get to the bedrock and provide some stability for the property. This reduces the amount of excavation we need to do, and it may well be that we can do soakaways, which we'd assumed originally that we couldn't do, and may also mean that we can do a lot less excavation than we were originally planning to do, with none of it effectively into rock. As part of this, they then prepare a remediation report. We are expecting to find some contamination in the soil, and so the normal remediation for soil contamination is to put 3 feet of graded and cleaned topsoil on top of the land. We may have to scrape back in order to put that on and give us a level surface to work through, but it will give us a garden and some landscaping at the same time. So some of the cost of the physical work is paid back in terms of the final shape of the property. We do know that we will have to put in a radon barrier because it's a high risk radon area, which involves putting a membrane and a ventilation gap underneath the foundation so that the radon can escape to the atmosphere. Also, as part of the initial outline planning permission, we are required to do an ecology study, which includes a biodiversity mitigation and enhancement strategy, which basically is all about wildlife considerations, insects, bats and birds in our case, and planting recommendations for how the properties are treated in the future to encourage wildlife. And the reason for this is we're right on the edge of open countryside, so we have to be mindful of where we sit in the local environment. Having completed those, we'll then submit obviously our planning application, but in parallel we'll be looking for a groundwork contractor who is able to work with the type of physical construction that we're using and the resulting foundation structure. They'll have to clear the site and do a first pass at landscaping and terracing, bearing in mind the foundation issues we've already discussed. It's possible that, for instance, we'll have to do what's called mini piling, which is basically putting concrete piling down onto the bedrock, and any retaining walls that they need to do, and obviously also drainage and services design. At the same time, we'd normally recruit a structural engineer who has a variety of roles, consulting on the point and line loadings from the structure to the foundations and input to building regulations to make sure everything's structurally sound. They can also provide advice on the foundation and reinforcement strategies, retaining structures, confirm structural integrity, and potentially advise on drainage and utility design as well. So because of the structure we're going to go with, we'll have to have a structural engineer. The two roles that we have passed on, one is a quantity surveyor, who basically acts as somebody that keeps control over all of the costs. It is probably more appropriate to a traditional build because we're going with a SIP design. It'll be a single fixed price contract with a SIP's manufacturing company, which takes some of the variability out of it. So we don't think we need a quantity surveyor. And some of that is an overlap to a project manager, but we're planning to do that ourselves. So both of those roles are basically made redundant by our approach to how we do it. We also have, we'll need a general contractor who will provide CDM compliance, subcontract to the SIPs manufacturer, do the roofing, cladding, internal fit out, electrics and plumbing. The SIP manufacturer will make the main structure of the building, including the windows and doing the air tightness and heat loss calculations, which we need for the tech, and will also provide some input to the building regulations submission when that's completed at the end of the project. Obviously, they'll have to coordinate with the groundworks contractor and the structural engineer. Finally, we'll be looking for an Ecotech contractor who will supply and fit the air source heat pump and MVHR, design and fit any underfloor heating, put in the control systems, solar panels, battery systems, and also apply for the grant rebates that come with having renewable energy, the renewable heat incentive, which we'll need to complete by March of next year in order to qualify unless it's extended. So attached to this video, we've also included the photograph of the hole that we're creating in the ground, which you can see is 8 feet deep, really only for a bit of visual variation in this. Yeah, that's it for now. Thanks.